A woman refused to stand for Judge Judy in her own courtroom, and what happened next left everyone speechless. This wasn't just about disrespect. This was about a past she thought she'd buried forever, a secret that would unravel right there in front of a packed courtroom, because when the bailiff stepped forward to handle her defiance, he recognized her face. And what he revealed about her 2004 felony destroyed everything she'd spent 20 years hiding. But here's what nobody expected. This wasn't even about what she came to court for. The 2,400 lawsuit she filed, that was just the beginning of a scheme that would expose her as the same predator she'd been 2 decades ago, targeting the same type of victim, using the same playbook. And it all started because she refused to do one simple thing: show respect. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. The Superior Court of Los Angeles, Department 42, hummed with the familiar rhythm of justice on a Tuesday morning in late September. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting geometric shadows across polished wood paneling that gleamed like honey under the fluorescent lights. The American flag stood sentinel behind the bench, its stars and stripes a silent reminder of the authority vested in this room. The gallery was packed, plaintiffs clutching manila folders stuffed with evidence, defendants nervously adjusting ties and smoothing skirts, curious observers who'd come to watch justice unfold in real time. The air was thick with tension, punctuated by the rustle of legal documents, the occasional cough, and whispered conversations that died the moment the bailiff's voice boomed through the space. This was Judge Judith Sheindlin's domain, and everyone knew it. For over 25 years, she'd commanded this courtroom with a reputation that preceded her like thunder before a storm. Judge Judy, as she was universally known, had built her legacy on 3 pillars: razor-sharp intelligence, zero tolerance for nonsense, and an almost supernatural ability to detect lies before they fully left someone's mouth. She didn't just hear cases. She dissected them, exposing truth with the precision of a surgeon and the force of a sledgehammer. Her sharp wit could dismantle the most carefully constructed deception in seconds, and her penetrating gaze had reduced countless liars to stammering, sweating messes. Attorneys feared her, fraudsters dreaded her, and honest people? They loved her, because in Judge Judy's courtroom, the truth always won. Officer Raymond Petrocelli stood at attention near the judge's bench, his imposing 6'3" frame a visual representation of order itself. At 52 years old, with 15 years as a courtroom bailiff and another 20 before that in law enforcement, Petrocelli had seen it all: violent outbursts, dramatic confessions, attempted escapes, and every flavor of human behavior from noble to despicable. His salt and pepper hair was cropped military short, his navy uniform pressed with creases sharp enough to cut paper. But it was his eyes that told the real story, dark, observant, and possessing a memory that colleagues called photographic. Petrocelli never forgot a face, a detail that had served him well throughout his career and would prove absolutely crucial on this particular morning. Beside him, Court Clerk Maria Martinez sat at her station, fingers poised over her keyboard, ready to record every word spoken for the official record. She'd been Judge Judy's clerk for 7 years, and she'd developed an almost telepathic sense of when things were about to get interesting. This morning, something in the air felt different. The docket was routine. Small claims cases, neighbor disputes, broken contracts, the bread and butter of civil court. But Martinez had learned to trust her instincts, and right now those instincts were humming. The routine was sacred and simple. At precisely 9 a.m., Officer Petrocelli would step forward, his voice carrying authority across every corner of the courtroom, and announce, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Judith Sheindlin," and everyone would rise. Plaintiffs, defendants, attorneys, observers, everyone. It wasn't optional. It wasn't negotiable. It was respect, pure and simple, for the institution of justice and the person who embodied it in this room. And on this Tuesday morning, as Petrocelli's voice rang out with those familiar words, every single person in that courtroom stood up. Every single person except one. Karen Mitchell remained seated in the 3rd row of the plaintiff's section, her perfectly manicured fingers scrolling through her iPhone with casual indifference. She was 42 years old but could pass for 35, her blonde hair styled in beachy waves that probably cost $300 at some trendy salon, her outfit screaming expensive in that subtle way only truly pricey clothes can: cream-colored blazer, silk blouse, designer jeans that fit like they were custom-made. A Gucci handbag sat on her lap, the double G logo catching the light like a trophy. Her nails were painted a flawless nude shade, her makeup applied with professional precision, and perched on top of her head were oversized Chanel sunglasses that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. Everything about Karen Mitchell's appearance said, "I have money, I have status, and I matter." But it was her expression that told the real story. As everyone around her rose to their feet in respect, Karen didn't even look up from her phone. Her lips pressed into a thin line of annoyance as if the very idea of standing was an inconvenience she couldn't be bothered with. A visible eye roll flickered across her face when the man next to her, a nervous-looking defendant in an ill-fitting suit, accidentally bumped her arm while standing. She shifted slightly in her seat, crossing her legs with deliberate slowness, and continued scrolling through what appeared to be Instagram, double-tapping posts without a care in the world. Karen was here as a plaintiff suing her neighbor over a fence dispute. The claim was for $2,400, and according to the case file, she was convinced she'd win easily. The defendant was a 67-year-old retired teacher, for crying out loud. Someone she'd probably assumed would be too intimidated or too tired to put up much of a fight. Her body language radiated confidence, the kind that comes from someone who's used to getting their way, who's learned that if you project enough entitlement, people usually just give in to avoid the hassle. But Karen Mitchell had made one catastrophic miscalculation. She'd forgotten that respect isn't about who you are or what you own. It's about recognizing that in certain places at certain times there are standards that apply to everyone. And in Judge Judy's courtroom, those standards were non-negotiable. Officer Petrocelli noticed her immediately. His eyes, trained by decades of observing human behavior, locked onto the blonde woman in the third row who seemed to think the rules didn't apply to her. He watched her for a moment, giving her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she hadn't heard him, maybe she was disabled and couldn't stand easily. Maybe there was some legitimate reason. But no. She was clearly able-bodied, clearly heard the announcement because everyone around her had responded, and clearly just choosing not to stand. Petrocelli began moving toward her, his footsteps deliberate and measured, each one echoing slightly in the now silent courtroom as Judge Judy took her seat at the bench, and every other person remained standing, waiting for the instruction to sit. Judge Judy's sharp eyes had already found Karen, too. From her elevated position at the bench, she had a perfect view of the entire courtroom, and the sight of one person sitting while everyone else stood out like a neon sign in a dark room. Her expression didn't change. She was far too experienced to show immediate reaction, but her gaze fixed on Karen with the intensity of a hawk spotting movement in tall grass. And then she waited, curious to see how this would play out, because in her quarter-century on the bench, Judge Judy had learned that how people respond to authority in those first few moments tells you everything you need to know about their character. If you love seeing entitled people get exactly what they deserve, you need to smash that like button right now and hit subscribe, because what happens next is absolutely unbelievable. This woman has no idea that her refusal to stand is about to expose a secret that will destroy her in front of everyone. The bailiff is about to reveal something that will change everything. Don't go anywhere, this is just getting started. Officer Petrocelli reached Karen's row, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone nearby. He leaned in slightly, keeping his voice professional but firm enough to carry authority. "Ma'am, you need to stand for the judge." His tone wasn't aggressive, it was the practiced voice of someone who'd given this instruction 1,000 times and expected immediate compliance. Karen didn't even look up from her phone. Her thumb continued scrolling, pausing to tap a heart on someone's vacation photo. "I'm a plaintiff," she said, her voice dripping with dismissive annoyance. "I'm here because she needs to hear my case. I'm the one who filed the lawsuit." She waved her free hand vaguely toward the bench as if Judge Judy were some service employee waiting to take her order. A ripple of shocked whispers spread through the gallery like wildfire. Heads turned. Eyes widened. The man standing next to Karen, her defendant, Martin Hayes, a 67-year-old retired high school teacher with thinning gray hair and a weathered face, looked absolutely mortified. He'd been standing respectfully, his hands clasped in front of him, his posture showing the kind of deference instilled by a lifetime of following rules. Now he glanced at Karen with an expression that mixed disbelief with something that looked almost like pity. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed into slits, her signature expression when someone had just made a catastrophic error in judgment. She leaned forward slightly in her chair, her hands folding deliberately on the bench in front of her. When she spoke, her voice cut through the courtroom murmurs like a knife through silk. "Young lady, in my courtroom everyone stands. That includes you. I don't care if you're the plaintiff, the defendant, or the Queen of England. When you're in this room, you show respect." Karen finally looked up, meeting Judge Judy's gaze with shocking defiance. "I have a bad knee," she announced loudly, as if she'd just played an unbeatable trump card. "I can't stand for long periods. It's a medical condition." She rubbed her right knee for emphasis, her face arranging itself into an expression of pained martyrdom. Judge Judy's eyebrow arched so high it nearly reached her hairline. She made a show of looking Karen up and down, her gaze traveling from the designer sunglasses perched on Karen's head to her expensive shoes, 3-inch heels, not exactly the footwear of someone with a debilitating knee condition. "I don't see a cane," Judge Judy observed, her voice acidic. "I don't see crutches. I don't see a wheelchair. I don't even see a hint of discomfort on your face except for the annoyance that I'm wasting your precious time." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Try again, and this time try the truth." Karen's face flushed red, anger replacing her facade of casual indifference. She stood abruptly, wobbling slightly in her heels, and pulled her phone up to eye level, deliberately starting to record. "This is discrimination." Her voice rose to a pitch that made several people in the gallery wince. "I know my rights. I'm documenting this abuse of power. You can't treat people like this." Officer Petrocelli stepped closer, his eyes locked on Karen's face with an intensity that made her recording hand falter slightly. Something was clicking in his mind, a recognition that went beyond this moment, beyond this courtroom. He'd seen that face before. Not recently, not in passing, but somewhere significant, somewhere that mattered. His jaw tightened as memories began surfacing. Memories from another courtroom, another state, another lifetime ago when he'd been a young deputy in Nevada. Judge Judy noticed the shift in her bailiff's demeanor immediately. She'd worked with Petrocelli long enough to read his body language like a book, and right now every line of his posture screamed that something important was happening. "Officer Petrocelli," she said, her voice cutting through Karen's continued protests about discrimination and rights and lawsuits she'd file. "Do you have something to share with the court?" Petrocelli pulled out his tablet, his fingers moving with purpose across the screen. Karen's defiant expression began to crack at the edges, uncertainty creeping into her eyes as she watched the bailiff's face transform from annoyed to focused to something that looked almost predatory. "Your Honor," Petrocelli said, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of barely contained intensity. "I'd like permission to run a background check on the plaintiff before we proceed." "Excuse me?" Karen's voice went shrill, the phone in her hand shaking slightly. "That's an invasion of privacy. You need a warrant or something. This is about a fence dispute, not—" She stopped mid-sentence and everyone in the courtroom noticed it. The way her hand gripped her Gucci bag tighter, the way her eyes darted toward the exit, the way her carefully constructed confidence seemed to evaporate like morning mist. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, a predator recognizing the scent of blood in the water. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, emphasizing the formality, "when someone shows the level of disrespect you've displayed in the last 5 minutes, I start questioning their credibility. I start wondering what else they're hiding. Officer Petrocelli, you have my permission. Run the background check." "This is insane," Karen protested, but her voice had lost its power. She sat down hard, forgetting her supposed bad knee entirely, her face going pale beneath her perfectly applied foundation. "There's nothing, you won't find. This has nothing to do with my case." Martin Hayes, the elderly defendant, watched the scene unfold with growing comprehension. He'd spent 35 years as a teacher, and he'd developed a sixth sense for when students were hiding something. Karen had that same look now, the cornered expression of someone whose lies were about to be exposed. He remained standing, silent, letting justice run its course. Petrocelli's fingers flew across his tablet, accessing databases that connected courtrooms across the country. His eyes widened as information populated the screen. He looked from the tablet to Karen, then back again, and a grim smile touched his lips. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I need to approach the bench." The private conversation at the bench lasted less than 30 seconds, but to everyone watching, it felt like an eternity. Judge Judy's expression shifted from curious to shocked to absolutely furious in the span of a few whispered words from Officer Petrocelli. Her eyes locked onto Karen like a missile acquiring its target, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Mrs. Mitchell," Judge Judy said, each syllable carefully enunciated,
"Officer Petrocelli has just informed me of something very interesting about your background."
"Something that happened in February 2004 in Las Vegas, Nevada. Case number 04CR3847, District Court of Nevada. Does that ring any bells?" The color drained completely from Karen's face. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. That was 20 years ago," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I served my time. I paid my debt." "You can't—" "I can," Judge Judy interrupted, her tone absolute zero. "And I will. Officer Petrocelli, please share with this courtroom exactly what you found." Officer Petrocelli turned to face the courtroom, his voice clear and unwavering, the voice of a man who'd waited 20 years for this moment. Karen Elizabeth Mitchell, formerly Karen Elizabeth Brentwood, was convicted in February 2004 of wire fraud. She was employed as a paralegal at Henderson & Associates law firm in Las Vegas, where she had access to client trust accounts. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. Over an 8-month period, she embezzled $87,000 from elderly clients, people who trusted the legal system to protect them during the most vulnerable times of their lives. Gasps erupted throughout the gallery. Karen's hands were shaking now, her designer handbag falling to the floor, its contents spilling across the courtroom tile. Lipstick, car keys, a wallet stuffed with credit cards. She made no move to retrieve any of it. Martin Hayes stood frozen, his weathered face showing a mixture of vindication and sadness. This was the woman who'd been suing him for $2,400, claiming he owed her money for a fence they'd already split evenly. Petrocelli continued, his voice gaining strength. She targeted 3 specific victims. Rose Patterson, a 78-year-old widow, $34,000 stolen from her late husband's estate settlement. James Cordova, an 82-year-old veteran, $28,000 from his disability settlement. And a cancer patient whose family never saw $25,000 from their retirement account. He looked directly at Karen, and his voice dropped to something almost personal. Rose Patterson was my grandmother's best friend. I was a young deputy in Henderson when we arrested you. I watched you get escorted out of that law firm in handcuffs, screaming that you were being framed, that everyone was lying, that you'd done nothing wrong. Karen's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. I was young, she choked out. I made mistakes. I paid everything back. I went to prison. Why are you doing this to me? Judge Judy's voice was ice. Because, Mrs. Mitchell, you didn't learn a single lesson. You're here today trying to defraud another elderly person. Mr. Martin Hayes, a retired teacher on a fixed income. Same victim profile, same fraudulent scheme. The only difference is 20 years and a name change. This is absolutely insane. If you're loving this courtroom justice, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now. Judge Judy turned her attention to Martin Hayes, her expression softening slightly. Mr. Hayes, please tell this court about the fence dispute that brought you here today. Martin cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. Your Honor, Mrs. Mitchell moved in next door to me about 18 months ago. We shared a property line and the old fence needed replacing. We both agreed on that. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase, his hands surprisingly steady for someone his age. We got quotes. The average was $1,200. Mrs. Mitchell insisted on premium cedar with decorative posts. $2,400 total. We agreed to split it 50-50. I paid her my half, $1,200 up front. He handed the canceled check to the clerk, who passed it to Judge Judy. The fence was installed in May, Martin continued. Beautiful work. I was happy with it. I thanked her. 2 months later, she sent me a demand letter claiming I owed another $1,200. She said the original quote only covered labor, not materials. His voice wavered slightly. Your Honor, I'm 73 years old. I live on a pension and Social Security. $1,200 is significant to me. But I almost paid it just to avoid this. To avoid conflict, to avoid court, to avoid trouble. Judge Judy examined the documents before her. Text messages between Martin and Karen from March, clearly showing the agreed-upon price of $2,400 total, split evenly. A contractor's invoice showing the complete job, materials included, for exactly $2,400. Bank records showing Martin's $200 payment to Karen, and Karen's $2,400 payment to the contractor. The math was simple, brutal, and damning. Mr. Hayes, Judge Judy said gently, what changed your mind about paying? Martin's eyes met hers, and in them was a lifetime of integrity. I taught mathematics for 35 years, Your Honor. I taught kids that actions have consequences, that honesty matters, that standing up to bullies is the only way they stop. His voice grew stronger. 3 weeks before she filed this lawsuit, I reported her to our HOA. She was running an unlicensed business from her home. Life coaching, she called it. Charging $200 an hour for manifestation and abundance coaching. It violated our HOA rules, caused parking problems, and her clients were disruptive. Karen's head snapped up. You ruined my business, she hissed, her grief momentarily forgotten in a flash of rage. I was helping people. You jealous old... Enough! Judge Judy's voice cracked like a whip. Mrs. Mitchell, you filed this fraudulent lawsuit as retaliation. You targeted Mr. Hayes because he dared to hold you accountable, just like you targeted elderly clients 20 years ago who trusted you. Judge Judy's gavel came down with finality, the sound echoing through the stunned courtroom like a gunshot. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm dismissing your case with prejudice. Not only do you owe Mr. Hayes nothing, but I'm awarding him $3,700, $1,200 for his court costs, time, and distress, plus $2,500 in sanctions for filing a frivolous and retaliatory lawsuit. She leaned forward, her eyes boring into Karen. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the California State Bar for investigation. into potential fraud and violation of your restitution terms. Your pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly victims hasn't changed in 20 years. And that tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Karen sat motionless, tears streaming down her face, her entire carefully constructed life crumbling in real time. The designer clothes, the expensive handbag, the perfect hair. None of it could protect her from the truth that had finally caught up. Judge Judy turned to Martin Hayes, her expression transforming into something almost warm. Mr. Hayes, you did something brave today. You stood up when it would have been easier to pay and move on. You trusted the system when you had every reason to be cynical. This country needs more people like you. People who remember that integrity isn't just a word, it's a way of life. Martin's eyes glistened with tears. Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to do what was right. Officer Petrocelli approached Karen with the judgment paperwork, and as he handed it to her, he spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. I told you 20 years ago that you'd regret what you did. Mrs. Patterson, the widow you stole from, she lost her home within a year. She died broken because of you. I never forgot her face, and I never forgot yours. He straightened, his voice returning to professional volume. The court has ruled. You're dismissed. Karen gathered her scattered belongings with shaking hands, her sunglasses, her lipstick, her phone. The gallery parted as she walked toward the exit, their silence more damning than any words could be. She paused at the door, looking back one final time at Martin Hayes, who stood surrounded by supportive strangers offering handshakes and kind words. No apology came from her lips, just a broken woman finally facing consequences she'd spent 2 decades running from. The door closed behind her with a hollow thud that sounded like the closing of a chapter, the end of a con, the death of a lie that had lived far too long. Judge Judy watched her go, then returned her attention to the next case on the docket. Because justice never sleeps, and there were more people waiting who needed the truth to win. Martin Hayes walked out of that courtroom 20 minutes later with a judgment in his hand and his dignity fully intact. The viral video of Karen's exposure would reach 15 million views within 48 hours. News outlets would pick up the story. The neighborhood would rally around Martin, organizing a community barbecue in his honor. 3 other neighbors would come forward with similar stories of Karen's attempted schemes, fake shared expenses, inflated bills, convenient misunderstandings that always seemed to benefit her wallet. And Karen herself would be forced to sell her house at a loss, the wage garnishment eating away at her income, her marriage dissolving as her husband finally learned the full truth of who he'd married, her life coaching business evaporating as clients fled in horror. But the real victory wasn't in Karen's downfall. It was in the lesson that echoed through every share, every comment, every person who watched that courtroom video and thought twice about letting injustice slide. Officer Petrocelli's 20-year-old memory had protected someone. Martin Hayes' courage had inspired thousands. And Judge Judy's unwavering commitment to truth had reminded everyone, watching that respect isn't about power or position, it's about recognizing that we're all accountable to something bigger than ourselves. Karen Mitchell refused to stand for Judge Judy. In the end, she couldn't stand at all under the weight of her own lies. And somewhere, in a quiet neighborhood with a new fence standing strong between properties, an elderly math teacher tends his garden and smiles, knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing actually wins. If this story of justice restored your faith that karma is real, you need to subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss these incredible courtroom moments where entitled people get exactly what they deserve. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in Martin Hayes' position? Would you have paid the $1,200 just to avoid the hassle? Or would you have fought back like he did? And remember, respect costs absolutely nothing, but disrespect can cost everything. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where another entitled person learns that actions have consequences.